Welcome to the first ever podcast for Bloom Within. This podcast is about empowering your own Latina identity and self exploration. Now, before we talk about today's topic, I wanted to mention something I saw on TikTok recently that I think is important for the context of this podcast, and it also resonated with me. At Rachel Sawadi said in a video of hers that this isn't advice, this is a personal anecdote. Hashtag bars. Everything on my podcast is just that, a personal anecdote. I definitely don't feel qualified enough to give people advice because this podcast is about taking the journey to finding one's authentic self, and I am still in the beginning stages of my own. There is no right or wrong on this journey, there just is. As today is the first day of Hispanic Heritage Month, I thought it would be the most suitable for me to start off this podcast on my journey of dealing with burnout in the workplace trauma, and how that affected my life and the choices I would eventually have to make to get out of this quote unquote burnout well that I was in, that I kept myself in, that at times I felt safe in because that was the norm, and that I would eventually have difficulty getting out of. When I think about my own burnout, I think of the Greek mythology story of Icarus because I really was the Icarus in my own life. The call was coming from inside the house. Now, if you don't know the story of Icarus, a brief summary is that he was flying with his father to get out of imprisonment using wings that his father had created. And instead of listening to his father, story of my life, he flew closer and closer to the sun, which would eventually get rid of the glue on the wings, and he would fall to his death in the ocean. Tragic. The moral of the story really is the dangers of hubris, which, if you aren't sure what that means, it really is just excessive pride or excessive self confidence, but it also touches on recklessness and being too overconfident in oneself that you don't seek advice of those who have more experience or wisdom than you. So, in what ways does the story of Icarus relate to my own burnout? Before we get into that, there are 6 themes in the story that relate back to burnout, and they are overambition, such being overworked, ignoring warning signs, lack of self care, the crash and consequences, balancing aspiration and reality, as well as seeking help. So, how did burnout start with me? Obviously, it was overambition and being overworked. Icarus had an overabundance of ambition when he flew close to the sun. And guess what? That was me. I constantly push myself in the workplace every day by working longer hours or past my scheduled hours, working on weekends, working on vacations, working on holidays, taking on more projects outside of my already non existent job description, spreading myself thin, and not setting boundaries or not upholding the boundaries I had already set in place. I pushed myself to achieve more when it definitely was not necessary and I could have did the bare fucking minimum. I needed to overachieve. Why? Because I felt like I had to show my worth in the workplace. I'm being so serious when I say that I overworked myself and I took on more projects than I should have, and I didn't know how to say no. My people pleasing tendencies were in full throttle in this job, and it was like a car alarm going off. I truly thought I would have people hate me if I said no, but because I did not say no, I slowly but surely started to resent the work I was doing, my role, and my job. I felt used and underappreciated, and this all could have been avoided if I did not ignore the warning signs from day fucking one. In the story of Icarus, his father warned him about flying too close to the sun and the consequences that would happen if he were to do so. I personally did not have any family members giving me advice to quit my job in the beginning. In my family, it is very common to just power through bad moments and not feel the emotions of it all. It is better to ignore than address, and that if you power through, you will get through it. If that isn't the most backward ass way of thinking, I don't know what is. In the first 2 years of my employment at a job where I lasted 5 years, my family would tell me to power through it because of the pay, the benefits, how much time I got off, and the ability to leave early every Friday. They would say no other job would give me those benefits and I should be grateful. And I did what I assumed I should have done. I sucked it up and ignored the blaringly red warning signs. My warning signs manifested physically and emotionally in a big way. They were basically a billboard in Times Square. And you know what I did? I kept pushing them further and further down, powering through my burnout until I flew too close to the sun and all my feathers and all my wings fell off and I plunged into an ocean of unhappiness, depression, and self loathing. After I fell, I was left feeling unfulfilled, uninspired, and wondering if this was all life had to offer. By ignoring the warning signs, I completely neglected my self care. And before burnout, I was and still am a huge believer and advocate of self care, both physically and emotionally. I was always advocating to friends and family therapy and surrounding yourself with a support system for them, but not for me. I completely ignored my own advice. And my warning signs of burnout were apparent, especially in the ways it manifested. Emotionally, I was depressed, unhappy in a job that took all my creativity, and where I ultimately felt unfulfilled, uninspired, and just empty. I was also irritable, short tempered, and detached. And physically, I had gained over 70 pounds, 50 of those in less than a year, and I lost so much hair due to stress that I was later diagnosed with alopecia. And let me tell you, losing a lot of my hair would make me spiral emotionally. It was the fucking proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. In my Latina household, hair is everything. It signifies femininity and beauty. And at that time, every aspect of my life was falling apart. And I felt like I belly flopped into the ocean and there was no one to pull me out of the thrashing current that was my life at the time. I was so unhappy, I started to seclude myself and became a hardened version of myself. Now, before my burnout, I considered myself an empathetic person, easygoing, kind. But my burnout took it, flipped it, and reversed it. Right? It made me an unjustifiable bitch with little patience for any person, friend, family, foe. It didn't matter. I also began to neglect myself, my identity, personality, hobbies, and interests. I stopped making YouTube videos, stopped creating makeup looks, and found little interest in things that used to bring me joy, like makeup, social media, and even traveling. The only time I would put on makeup was to go to work, and it was a basic ass makeup look. And when I mean basic, I mean basic. I did not stop because I realized makeup was not for me or that it no longer brought me joy. I stopped because I was physically and emotionally burnt out. I would allow my job to take all my creativity, and I was left with nothing. And you know what I did? I continued to power through and ignore the big red signs telling me to reevaluate my life and that I was severely burnt out. I just continued to persevere. Why? Because I had so much hubris that I thought I could beat my burnout, that I could win this war, and that I didn't need anyone's help to do that. I kept making excuses and validating a negative work ethic so much that I was purposely ignoring the warning signs. But guess what? As much as you want to ignore the warning signs and you want to push through and overwork yourself, the crash is imminent and it will happen. It is like the Kool-Aid man who burst through the wall. That was how my crash happened. Now, how was my crash? Which one? Because I had several. They were chaotic, messy, and instant. My crash created strained relationships, and my overall performance and productivity at work declined. My physical health was in the shitter alongside my emotional health, which was in the ninth circle of hell. I lost everything because I lost Kayla. I lost the very essence that makes me, me. I was so depressed, I would cry almost every day, at home and at work. And when I mean I was crying, I was fucking crying. I would cry at home when I woke up, when I was in the shower, when I was doing my makeup so bad that I had to fix it. I was crying on the 6 train going to work, which as New Yorkers know that New Yorkers are going to ignore you if you're crying. I was crying on the bus to go to the west side. I was crying walking to work. When I got to work, I was crying. And then I repeated the cycle when I went home. I was crying on the train back, on the bus back, at home, going to sleep. I was just a crying ass mess. And there were days I had zero energy and I would call into work and say I was sick. I started to pull away from my friends and family and I self isolated. But that was not my final crash, right? My final crash happened in mid September 2022 and I had my biggest mental breakdown ever. I was crying so hard, my grandmother and mother didn't even know how to console me. They couldn't understand what I was saying as every word that came out of my mouth was incoherent. You ever cry so much that you're like, this, that was me. That was me. I was so burnt out from a job that no longer served me professionally, and it was at that moment that my own family told me I needed to quit my job. That persevering was no longer an option, and no job was worth me crying the way I was. Now, I don't hate the job or the company I used to work for. I blame myself because I never stood 10 toes down on my boundaries or set realistic goals or expectations for myself in this company. I should have advocated for myself more and not allowed myself to do 9 different job descriptions outside of my actual title. I wanted to prove myself so bad, and that was my downfall. I knew I needed to seek help in order to finally find myself again, and that is exactly what I did. I was putting off therapy for so long, but I knew I could not do that anymore, and I wanted and needed to find a therapist who would help provide me with the tools to navigate myself because I had already theoretically crashed into the ocean like Icarus. I needed to work on my physical and mental health while also rediscovering my hobbies, my personality, aspirations, and dreams. If I think of the story of Icarus, the feathers that fell off were parts of myself, and I needed help finding them in this ocean of sadness and finding a way to either glue them back on or grow them bigger and better. When looking for my therapist, I wanted someone who would understand the nuances of my Puerto Rican culture and my matriarchal family. And I went on a website called latinxtherapy.com and read so many potential therapist bios and their services, whether they were telehealth or in person. And I eventually found one that resonated with me, and I placed an inquiry for contact. I would start my therapy journey late October, early November 2022, and it is still ongoing to this day. Over the next few months in therapy, we unpacked my workplace trauma, how it had similarities to my childhood PTSD, such as lack of communication, being all over the place, and more, and discussed what the next steps would be. My next steps journey falls under the last theme of Icarus, which is balancing aspiration and reality. I needed to find a balance between ambition and what was practical. I needed to set goals, manage expectations, and recognize my own limitations, which is hard for me. Through therapy and self reflection, I realized my former job no longer served me professionally. I was not happy in the role. I did not enjoy what I did, so no matter what goals I set or how I would manage my expectations, I would not be happy there. So I made a conscious decision. I would quit my job at the end of the school year, so end of June, regardless if I had a job lined up or not. Now, this was not the first time I would resign from this job. I actually rage quit in 2020 and then swiftly rescinded my resignation. Now, in hindsight, I wish I wouldn't have. And now, this is what I mean when I say that this is not advice. This is a personal anecdote. I do not, I'm going to stress this again, I do not recommend somebody quitting their job without a backup, especially in the job market and the way of the world. However, this was the best option for me. I confided my decision with my family, my therapist, and my friends months in advance, months before I even put in my resignation. All of them were supportive of my decision. With more months of therapy, my sessions enlightened me on what I needed in a new working environment: better communication, set goals and expectations, clear instructions, and a more progressive environment and culture. Now, I know I touched on warning signs and how I ignored them so much my physical and emotional health were affected, but those were not my first signs. From day one, hell, I think from the moment I walked in, right? I knew the place I was working at was not the best match for me professionally. I was crying throughout my probationary period for the first 3 months, and I still stayed como un pendeja. The issues I pointed out to my friends and colleagues persisted throughout my 5 year tenure, and they were never addressed. Now, please do not give my former employer any negative reviews. This is just my experience. That place was not meant for me. So many thrive in that working environment, while others like myself withered. I met some amazing people there, which would not have been possible if I did not work there. Now, I don't think I should have stayed there 5 years, but I did meet some amazing people. This place was a wake up call for me, and it taught me my most valuable lesson: to put myself first. Now, 2.5 months post my resignation, I am no longer as burnt out as I was. I am taking my time finding the right job for me and not accepting anything and everything, which I know is a privilege. I know what I want in my next workplace, and more importantly, I know what I do not want in my next job. Burnout has not only been a learning experience, but a healing one. Healing from burnout is just as important, And I've started picking back up hobbies and doing activities I never thought I would be doing, like the Broad City Challenge or going to a ballet at the Met or even starting this podcast. I am doing things that will make me happy and learning who I am. This is where Bloom Within came from. For the first time this year, I included a word of the year on my vision board. My word is bloom. Now, this definition is not something I created. I found this on the internet, so don't come for me. But according to the internet, bloom is the process of one coming into their full beauty and health after doing the hard self work. And to bloom is to become a radiant being that can now glow as their authentic self. Quitting a job that no longer served me is just a part of my own bloom. Unlike Icarus, I survived falling into the ocean and I'm slowly starting to fly again. If you made it this far in the episode, I am grateful. I promise you that next week's episode would not be as heavy as I'll be talking about creating fall bucket lists, which I'm super excited about. And there will be new episodes out every Thursday at 10 a.m. Thank you again for listening to my Icarus tale and how I am managing my burnout in 2023. Let me know how you guys are managing your burnout and any tips and tricks that you find really help you. Again, I can't wait to you guys hear next week's episode, so please stay tuned and I hope you have a great rest of the week. Bye.